Well, I believe that since today is our picnic, I'm contractually obligated to keep my sermon short. So I will do what I can. But first, I think it's important to start with the most important news story of the week. We've all heard about it, and let's just throw it out there. The Detroit Lions are in first place. How about that? All you Vikings fans and Packer fans, Bears fans. Cowboys are in first place too? Yay. The reason I say this is because the Lions are playing in Green Bay today, where they haven't won since 1991. And I don't have faith that they're going to win today. And so I don't really have faith that I'll stand up here again this year and say the Lions are in first place. So that's why I do it today. So in a fun segue, let us talk about faith. I don't have faith in the Lions because I've been a Lions fan my whole life, and they've never really proven it to me that they're a good football team. And so my faithometer is low in the Lions. And I think we all have a little faithometer inside of us. There are moments where our faith is high and moments where our faith is low. And in this letter to Timothy, Paul is writing to Timothy to hold fast, hold strong to your faith. And then the next verse he says, guard that which you've been entrusted with. Guard your faith. Paul says this to Timothy because I think Paul believes that there are things in this world that go against our faith and want to bring our faith level down and take our faith away. So he says to Timothy, hold strong, guard your faith. So what are the things in life that tend to take our faith away? And the first thing I think is stares us in the mirror every morning. It's ourselves. When we try and understand God, and we try and fit God into this box that we live in, into this world that we live in, and try and understand how God fits in to our life and how God fits into our world, it can often lead to doubt because we can't figure it out. And if it doesn't make sense, then it affects our faith at times. And I think that's part of being human. It's natural. And it's normal. Everyone goes through that in life where we're trying to figure it out and it just doesn't seem to make sense because it's not possible for us to understand God. And when we try to, we get frustrated. And so that leads to doubt. And so one of the things that, one of our biggest opponents to our faith is ourselves, trying to figure it out, trying to figure out God in our world. I'm going to talk about it later, the flip side. So ourselves, and then the things that just happen, the things that happen around us, the things that happen to us, I think, are something that takes our faith away. Habakkuk this morning writes, how long do I have to yell violence and you do not come and save me? Human beings just don't get along really well. I mean, you don't have to read very far down the newspaper to see all the violence going on in the world. And when you look at this kind of violence, you think, how can this happen? How can God let this happen? Especially when innocent people are the ones who are paying the price. So many innocent people die every day through violence, through accidents. I read this morning that 7 people died yesterday in Mexico at a monster truck show. I mean, just how can this happen? Continually, daily, every hour. People just have a hard time getting along. Luckily, we haven't gotten to that point here in our country, but, I mean, people aren't getting along in our government. Come on. It's just hard to look at things and see the peace and grace of God in the world. But then when we look at our lives, how there's so many people that I've come into recently that have just had a bout of illness that has come and just stayed for 6 months, a year, and people just haven't felt good for so long. And it's like, I just reached retirement, or everything was clicking, going really well, and then all of a sudden, bam. And the doctors can't figure it out, and it takes a while. It's like, why does this happen to me? And why is this all happening at once? The things that happen to us and the things that happen around us affect our faith. And then finally, the people that surround us. The people that want to keep the status quo, the people that like the world the way that it is. I'm immediately drawn to Martin Luther, who said, there's something wrong here with the way we're doing things. And the people, the Catholic Church called him in and said, you have to take it back. And Martin Luther had a moment where I'm sure his faith was tested. And he could have taken it back and gone on with life the way that it was, the way that he was used to. But he stood there and said, here I stand, for I can do no other. I can't take it back, because what I truly believe is true is true. And he was kicked out of the church. And he thought, basically, when Martin Luther said that, he thought it meant his death. He thought that as soon as he left that building, they were going to kidnap him and kill him. And so he was literally willing to die for what he believed in. I'm reminded of Martin Luther King, who fought the status quo of the way this nation was 50 years ago, and who every day was threatened, but still stood up and said, I have a dream. I have a dream the status quo will be changed and that people will treat each other the way they should be treated. People around us often affect our faith. And if we let them, and if we let the things that happen to ourselves, and if we let the wrestling affect our faith, we can truly have our life change. We can stop believing, and we can let go, which is why Paul writes to Timothy, hold fast, stay strong, guard your faith. Guard your faith at all costs. And when Paul's writing this to Timothy, Timothy's not living in a world where Christianity is the norm. Timothy's living in a world where Christianity Christians were persecuted. Christians were hunted down. At all costs, guard your faith. So how do we guard our faith? We guard our faith by realizing God is bigger than we can understand. By not trying to make God fit into our world, but realize that God has created us to fit in His world. And trying to understand God is the same as looking at this building and trying to understand the person who made it and designed it. Well, then we can know a little bit about them, but we can't really know who they are just by looking at beams and lights and concrete. It's just frustrating if that's what we're going to try and do. But if we seek God, we can understand God. And so I've talked about prayer, and I've talked about reading the Bible, how we can do that. And it's important to come to worship. And it's important to do all the Christian things. But Jesus says, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. I don't know about you, but I've never moved a mountain. Has anybody ever moved a mountain? I think that Jesus says that it's not just faith, because faith really doesn't have a lot of power if it's sitting on a couch. But it's living faith. It's actually believing what Jesus says is right and living that faith out. That we can actually move mountains. And so there's all these things we can do. We can pray, we can read the Bible, we can go to church, we can do all these things. But the Psalm says today, see what God will do. Expect God to do big and great things. Live out your faith expecting God to move mountains. There's only 2 things I've ever seen that moved a mountain. Well, there's 3, but I don't have a theological analogy for dynamite. So those are the 2 things in nature that I've seen move mountains. Wind. Have you ever been to a sand dune? Wind can move a mountain, literally a mountain of sand. When I worked at a camp, Stony Lake Lutheran camp, we'd go to the sand dunes every week. And there was this house that was built 100 yards away from the sand dunes 50 years ago. Now it's 10 feet away from the sand dunes. Because over time, that mountain has moved closer and closer to that house because the wind has moved the sand. And then, if you go out west, you see these beautiful mountains, and they're shaped by water, by glaciers. Go to the Grand Canyon, you see the river at the bottom, and how water has the ability to literally move and change the way mountains look. Water and wind. Powerful, yes, but it's not the power of water and wind that moves mountains. It's the persistence of power and wind. The continual effort that never stops. The water never stops running, and the wind never stops blowing. And mountains have been moved. We can move mountains together by praying, reading the Bible, coming to worship, serving others. It may not happen in one day, but if we do it together and we're persistent, we can literally move mountains. I was thinking this morning on the way in, when I die, all that I want people to say about me is that I had faith that could move mountains. How great of a tribute would that be to have someone say about you that he had the faith to move mountains? And I think there are a lot of mountains in our area that need to be moved. And I think with persistent, faithful people, like the ones I'm looking at today, we can move them. I invite you to join me as we move mountains. Amen.